Okay, so get this. Samuel Little confessed to 93 murders. 93.
Wow.
93 lifetimes. 93 stories. It's almost too big to grasp, right?
It really is.
And for years, this guy was practically a ghost just moving through the shadows. So how did this happen? We have to rewind, go back to the very beginning. We're diving into the life and crimes of Samuel Little, a man the FBI believes was the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. And to do that, we're going to be unpacking this YouTube video from Criminalista Nocturno. It's a channel that digs into true crime, especially in Latin America. It's in Spanish originally, but we've got you covered with the translation.
I think one of the things that's so fascinating about this case is how someone could commit so many horrific acts and remain undetected for so long. It's like he understood how to exploit the cracks in the system.
Yeah, he wasn't just brutal, he was calculated. So Samuel Little was born in Georgia in 1940. Let's talk about his early life, because it wasn't exactly sunshine and roses.
No, not at all. Abandoned by his mother, raised by his grandmother, in and out of reformatories by his teens. It's a classic recipe for instability and a lack of positive influences, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and there's this one anecdote from the video that really stuck with me. Little saw a teacher touching her neck, and it sparked this weird fascination in him. Again, looking back, it's almost like a blueprint, this dark foreshadowing of his later crimes.
It makes you wonder about the psychology of it all, right? This early fixation on the neck, on choking, maybe even like a connection to eroticized violence. It's disturbing.
It's seriously disturbing. And that instability continues into his adulthood. Petty crime, drifting around, even a short-lived marriage. It's all very unsettled. Then in 1971 in Miami, he commits his first known murder, Marie Presley. This is where we start to see his modus operandi, right?
Yeah. Right. So when we talk about a serial killer's MO, we're talking about their specific method of operation, right? Their signature way of committing crimes. And for Little, it often involved choking during sex. He admitted to this with Presley, which shows this messed up link between violence and arousal.
Yeah, so right off the bat, there's this, sexual sadism woven into his crimes.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that the video highlights other murders in Miami during this time, including a transgender woman. This tells us Little didn't have a victim type in the traditional sense. His criteria were more about vulnerability and opportunity.
But wouldn't you say there was still kind of a common thread? Weren't most of his victims marginalized women?
That's a valid point. There's definitely a pattern of targeting women who are less likely to be missed, or whose deaths might be easily explained away. It speaks to a chilling awareness of how to exploit societal biases.
Right, and that's what allowed him to stay under the radar for so long. He'd move from state to state, commit crimes, serve a little time, and then disappear again.
This constant movement was crucial to his ability to evade capture for decades. He was like a phantom, blending in, vanishing before anyone could connect the dots. The video also mentions his relationship with Marilia Dorsey, a woman 30 years his senior. She was an experienced thief, and they became partners in crime for a while.
So it seems like he always found people who enabled his criminal activities. Do you think he sought these relationships out to kind of fuel his darker side?
That's an interesting question. Dorsey might have provided some stability, a sense of normalcy, even within their criminal world. But Little's darker impulses continued to grow, culminating in a truly chilling incident in 1984. So in 1984, Little was arrested in San Diego. They found him in a car with two unconscious women, one of whom he'd brutally beaten.
It's kind of mind-blowing that even when he was caught red-handed, the justice system, they just didn't grasp the danger he posed. I mean, he only served like 2.5 years for that.
It was a massive failure on multiple levels, really. The investigation wasn't thorough enough, and they treated it like an isolated incident. No one seemed to consider that they might be dealing with a serial predator.
And so he was allowed to continue preying on vulnerable women for decades. It wasn't until 2012, after a drug arrest in Kentucky, that his past finally caught up with him.
Yeah, a seemingly minor arrest that unravels a nationwide web of murders. It's quite a twist. So his DNA was matched to 3 unsolved cases in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and the video talks about his reaction at the trial. He's yelling, "I didn't do it!" But, the evidence was overwhelming. It seems like even then he was just trying to control the narrative.
Right, and that desire for control, for being recognized, played a key role in his eventual confession. And this is where Texas Ranger James Holland enters the picture. He's the one who managed to get Little to talk.
This Holland guy seems like a real-life, mind reader. What was it about Little that made Holland suspect there was more to the story?
Well, Holland had this gut feeling, right? That there was more to Little than met the eye. The video describes their first meeting, Little denied being an abuser, but Holland, sensing something deeper, decided to take a gamble and call him a killer.
Wow. Talk about a power move.
Yeah.
Did Little get, like, angry?
Not at all. That was the trigger. It was like Holland had flipped a switch, Little's eyes lit up, and he even smiled a little. It was as though he'd been waiting for someone to finally see him for what he believed he truly was.
Oh, that's creepy, but also brilliant on Holland's part. Like, he knew how to speak Little's language. It almost sounds like he was appealing to his ego.
Exactly. And once that door was open, Little started talking. He agreed to share information about potential victims in Texas if they transferred him to a prison there.
So it was a trade, information for a change of scenery.
Hmm.
And what happened then? Did Little just spill everything?
It was like a dam had broken. He'd been holding all these stories inside for years. And now he had an audience who was willing to listen, to be horrified by his accounts. It became like a performance for him. Little just reveled in the details, the brutality, the way he'd outsmarted the authorities for so long.
God, that detail gives me goosebumps. To think that he could be so casual about such horrific acts. The video also mentions that he started drawing portraits of his victims. Hundreds of them, all from memory.
And those drawings became crucial to the investigation. Some were incredibly detailed, allowing investigators to identify victims who had been nameless for years. Others were more impressionistic, almost like he was trying to capture a feeling, a fleeting memory.
It's like he had this morbid portfolio of his victims. Talk about like a twisted artist statement. But it also makes you wonder, why draw them? Was it another way to exert control? To like relive the power he felt?
It's a chilling possibility. It really highlights the psychological complexity of the case. Little's need to document, to remember, to revisit his crimes through art. It speaks to a level of compulsion that goes beyond, simple bloodlust.
Well, we've talked about his MO, but let's get back to the victims for a second. The video really emphasizes that Little primarily targeted women who were marginalized, struggling with addiction, living on the streets.
That's a tragic pattern we see with many serial killers, unfortunately. They prey on those who are perceived as less likely to be missed, whose disappearances might not trigger a full-scale investigation.
Yeah, and it's a chilling calculation on Little's part. He knew who to target, where to find them, and how to make their deaths seem like accidents or overdoses. The video gives us one specific example, Melissa Thomas, a 24-year-old woman whose body was found in a Louisiana cemetery back in 1996. Little confessed to picking her up, offering her drugs, and driving her to the cemetery.
And there's this chilling detail, just before he killed her, as they were about to have sex in his car, Melissa asked him, "Why do you keep touching my neck? Are you a serial killer?"
Whoa. That's like straight out of a war movie. To think that she's sensed the danger, but...
It sends chills down your spine, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A moment of unsettling awareness from a victim who ultimately couldn't escape. And Little's reaction is even more disturbing. He told investigators that her question angered him, so he killed her.
God, it's not just about fulfilling some, like, dark desire. It's about control, dominance,
Yeah.
silencing them even in their final moments.
Absolutely. And the fact that he targeted women who were already marginalized, less likely to fight back or be believed, it's heartbreaking, really. It speaks to the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed him to operate for so long.
It really does make you wonder how many other potential victims are out there, women whose stories we'll never know.
Sadly, you're right. The FBI has only been able to definitively link him to 50 cases, even though he confessed to 93. The others remain unconfirmed. It's a lot to process. 50 confirmed murders and potentially dozens more. It's almost impossible to grasp the sheer scale of his crimes, all the pain he caused.
Yeah, and every single one of those numbers represents a life, a family grieving, a community impacted.
Exactly. It's crucial to remember the human cost of these crimes, the ripple effects that reach far beyond the immediate victims. It's not just about the killer, it's about those left behind.
The video also mentions Little's death in 2020. He died at the age of 80 while serving multiple life sentences.
Yeah, and even in his final words, there's this chilling lack of remorse. He reportedly said, "If God made me this way, why should I ask for forgiveness?" It's a disturbing final statement from a man who inflicted so much pain on others.
I mean, what can we even take away from a case like this? It's
Wow.
so horrific and complex.
That's the question we should all be asking. I think it starts with acknowledging that Little's ability to operate undetected for so long wasn't just due to his own cunning. There were systemic failures at play.
Right, like how the video points out that law enforcement often dismissed cases involving women like those Little targeted.
Right, their disappearances were less likely to be fully investigated. Their deaths, even when there were signs of foul play, were often attributed to overdoses or accidents. They were seen as disposable, their lives somehow less worthy of protection.
God, that's a really disturbing part of this whole story. It makes you think about societal biases, about who we value, who we choose to protect.
It's something we have to confront as a society. We need to address these biases both within the criminal justice system and beyond. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone, no matter their circumstances.
Yeah, and it also makes you think about the role race played. I mean, many of Little's victims were black women.
You can't ignore that. Historical and ongoing racial disparities in law enforcement and the justice system undoubtedly played a role in Little's ability to evade capture for so long. It reminds us that justice isn't always blind, that systemic biases have devastating consequences.
So how do we prevent something like this from happening again?
Well, it requires a multifaceted approach, improving forensic technology, strengthening communication between law enforcement agencies, addressing societal inequalities that make certain groups more vulnerable to predation.
But it goes beyond that, doesn't it? It's about creating a culture of empathy, speaking up against injustice, and working towards a society where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
Absolutely. Preventing future tragedies is a collective effort. We have to be more vigilant and confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
Well, we've covered a lot today. It's a heavy story, a lot to process. But if there's one thing for you, our listener, to take away, I think it's this. How can we turn this knowledge, this awareness of the darkness that exists, into positive action? How do we work to prevent future tragedies? It's not easy, but it's a question worth asking ourselves.